Hello, and welcome to the Healing Dreams Project, exploring projective dreamwork for your health and wholeness, with hosts Billy Ortiz and Dr. Royce Fitz. I am the producer, Viviana, and today we are going to explore metaphors, symbolism, archetypal, all sorts of things. And I would like to start with Royce because this is a topic that he has kind of brought to our attention. So, Royce, take it away.
Well, uh, so I didn't know I was going to catch the first pitch. I will do my best. And thank you. In our work together, uh, one of the things that I keep experiencing and re-experiencing, and it's not just in what us three have done, and as we have interviewed guests, this has been through the whole long history that I've had in the journey of dream work and specifically projective dream work, which for me now is in the neighborhood of 20 plus years, is the beautiful respect that we always seek to give to symbols, no matter what they are, in the dream world and in the waking world. And one of the things that I've experienced in the projective dream work process, and it came first to me most clearly when I began to attend the early retreats that Billy organized back in 2003. So not so long ago, and yet so very long ago in the world of projective dream work for me. And what I noticed then is how waking life work in different kinds of areas would use the waking life work would venture into things that I was not raised with, I was not familiar with very deeply. Although, because I'm a curious soul, I've certainly dabbled and wondered what is tarot? What is that? What are past life regressions? What's that about? What are the experiences of astrology? Because out of my experience, being raised out of a very fundamentalistic Christian culture, there was lots of fear and shame about using, stepping into that. And as I have studied and grown over the years in my own theology and philosophy, I know that in ancient scriptures, there are allusions and sometimes direct references to things about astrology and other kinds of influences that early Judaism had from around their world as they were forming and morphing and trying to understand their version of spirituality. So, so that that I'm sharing that because there, for me, have been kind of corrective explorations of saying, oh, modern day fundamentalist Christians, modern day conservative Judaic believers have a whole different view of what their history is like than what sometimes history really has promoted. So I'm lifting that up to say, it doesn't matter. There were conflicts that I experienced as I was growing and changing and doing my studies in theology and philosophy and counseling especially. So I would get challenged. Anyway, going to Billy's retreat, that's a long route to get there, is that there were these little booths of people who were doing readings of different kinds. And it was like, this is so fun because this is Boulder, Colorado, and it's liberating and freeing for me, as well as helping me to kind of look back on my history and playfully defy some of what I was raised in. And at the same time, what I notice, and this is my stuff, I think I'm correct, but it is my stuff. It is that sometimes people who need to leave abusive or distorted religious systems, and like I did, uh, that sometimes people were wounded by extremes of, let's say, I'll just be upfront about Catholicism or about Jehovah's Witness or about Mormonism or about conservative fundamentalistic Baptist oriented theology. People who had to leave and who'd been damaged had to leave that to find healing and liberation. And as they did, sometimes they would adopt what was, I would understand as a new age philosophy that had different forms of belief systems, but yet they would embrace those belief systems as rigidly as what they were having to reject in order to be healthy out of their old system. And so I noticed that stuff, and I noticed my own struggles about what is true and what is fact and what is real. And so when we in this aspect of projective dream work, when we look at what is it that the dream is trying to invite out of us, sometimes the symbols of astrology or the symbols of tarot or the symbols of other kinds of religious belief systems emerge, and it's like, oh wow, that makes sense. It makes sense. And it makes sense because, in my view, it's a metaphor. It's a story. It becomes a symbol of something the inner self seems to be looking for and finds a handle to say, oh, the great aha. I have integration of the inner insight and the outer experience. And so they become friends that way. So another piece, though, in my work as a spiritual counselor and military counselor and marriage and family therapist and having those kinds of things, theologian as well, I have amazing clients that I've worked with for 30, 35 years. Some of them I've actually worked with that long. But over the years, I've met people who are fundamentalist Christians who are yearning to explore their dreams. And yet, if they hear the word tarot or they hear the word astrology, it's like they get a startled response and they start like reacting like, I can't go there. This is of the devil. And it's like, after they know me and love me, and after I know them and love them, we can relax that brainstem reactivity and begin to wonder, what might this symbolize? If we don't like outright reject it, but we like a dream, if we literally interpret a dream, we're going to go crazy. If we believe everything that we dream about as literally physically true, we're going to go crazy and we may die, those kind of things. But if we look at these as symbols, then we can look at the dream as a symbol. We can look at astrology as a symbol. We can look at the sacred Christian scripture as symbol instead of saying it absolutely has to be physically, scientifically proven, or we lose our faith. It's like, no, let's take a breath, because Jesus spoke in symbols. Jesus spoke in story. And so that's what I want us to have a kind of an attunement to, is that what we are experiencing in dream work, when we bring up all aspects of symbolism, Christian or Hindi or Muslim or astrology or tarot, and whatever other symbols, we need to look at this as these are story, and story is what can heal us. I remember an author said, it doesn't have to be a fact to be true. It doesn't have to be literal. to be true. And so that's how I carry this. And that's how I carry it with a lot of my clients as we work on trust and relaxation to explore all of these symbols. So that's where I wanted to go a bit in describing that. So does this make sense to you two?
Yes, very much. This is why I'm particularly drawn to the language of Carl Jung and his teachings, because his idea of the synchronicity and his idea of the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is something that I inherit as a human, and I regardless of what my religious upbringing might be, and regardless of whatever training I received or didn't, there's a unspoken language of metaphor and symbol that lives within the archetypal realm of the collective unconscious. So even if I'm someone who's never looked at a tarot card in my whole life, or I've been taught that tarot is not something I should ever delve into, there's still going to be a map of the unconscious that unfolds through the journey of the Fool that we recognize in the major arcana. So what I've noticed after working with dreams now for 25 plus years is that even if I'm someone who doesn't know that language as the dreamer, I might have a dream, for instance, that has the number 12 that shows up frequently. And it's very clear, this number 12. And my projection on the dream would immediately go to the hangman in the tarot, which is a period in our lives where we reach, and I feel kind of stuck, and I feel kind of like I can't go forward, and I have to let go of something in order to be able to move on. So I would probably project that onto someone's dream right away. And most of the time, what's so interesting is most of the time it resonates for the dreamer. So even though they may have never known that 12 represented the hangman, it does resonate for them when I present that projection. So I look at it as the language of the heart and the language of the soul. And I think it's the language that unites us all, unites all humankind. If we allow it to be a language of symbols. Again, as you said, there's no reason to take anything literally. There's no reason, if I see my dreams as symbols and metaphors, why would I take astrology literally? Why would I take tarot literally? They're tools that maybe can help me discover another layer to it. But once again, it's what we always say in dreamwork, I can take it or leave it, and it's always dreamer's choice. So for me, it's and also, just as you mentioned, myth and story, and I also poetry very often.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I wanted to use the word poetry in that, but that's beautiful. Yes. Go ahead.
Because if you read a poem, there's a line in a Rumi poem. I think the poem is New Rule. The last line is, it's time to break the wine glass and fall towards the glass blower's breath. I just love that, because it's like, and it makes me think, what in the world does that mean? And so many other people I interpret it as, it's time to break the physical and to go into the inspiration, the glass blower's breath, that which made the wine glass. So there's something beautiful about it if I allow myself to be open to the language and to not cling to it and say, well, what the hell does that mean? And how come it doesn't make sense? How can you fall towards a glass blower's breath? And why would you want to break the glass anyway? So there's something. It's actually it's a language that unifies, as I said before, it unifies all of us, and it goes beyond the boundaries of whatever spiritual upbringing I might have had.
So I've got to respond to the beauty of what you're presenting. I haven't heard that poem, but I've heard stuff like that. And that, what you just used the word inspire, to get to the breath of the glass blower. So in ancient Judaic scripture, there is this breath of God that I believe it's a brach, the breath of God that breathes into. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's just because Billy brought up Rumi and
Yeah.
you're bringing up the breath of God. And Rumi said that the sound of the flute is the
Oh,
breath of God.
wow.
And I'm a
Yeah.
flutist. Krishna
Yes.
was a flutist. I mean, the flute is a sacred instrument. Anyway, I just
Oh,
wanted to add that, insert that in. And sorry to interrupt.
No, that's very good.
that it is it is an addition to the insight that we're moving toward, Viviana. So thank you. The flute is, and it is a breath instrument. And so we are inspired. And I believe the word inspire itself is an old Greek word. Is that correct? About,
It's Latin, inspirar in Spanish, to
Spirit.
breathe in, to take in, and
yeah,
to
yeah,
feel
yeah.
nourished.
Yes.
And
So all of these, and Billy, I got to interrupt because this proves, if I can use that word, what you were talking about, the collective unconscious, that in Spanish, in Greek, in in Hebrew, and in other places, that when 12 shows up or breath shows up, it's like somebody may not have ever thought consciously of this, and yet they dream about it. Or there is a waking life. I'll use a word, tool. There's a waking life tool that has been used for generations, like astrology, or like tarot, or like scripture reading, or meditation, or the I Ching. It's like
or fairy tales
these
or myths.
they
All of
yeah,
the
yeah,
above.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All of those things. They're all waking life tools, expressions of the collective unconscious. They're stories that don't have to be literal to be true.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'm a person of languages. I can say the basics, hello, thank you, how are you, in 35 languages. In fact, English is not my first language. Spanish is my first language. And
35?
35, yeah.
Golly molly.
Yeah.
Holy
Well,
moly.
I've visited 135 countries, and I haven't even tallied up how many countries I've actually lived in. Anyway, my point is that I just have, and my world is the language of music. And I just love increasing my languages. So I have music. I have a printed, published book of poetry. My language is poetry. I'm just drawn to the language of astrology, just as another language. I'm drawn to the language of tarot for its symbolisms, metaphors, and it's a language as well. I'm just drawn to the language of different religions. I love hearing about the Hindu versus the Buddhist versus the Confucianism. There's also there's so many. I love all religions. I'm all inclusive, all genders, all political systems. I'm just of the world, and I don't want to
Mm.
pinhole or speak against any of it. I just embrace it all, and I feel like there's something to be learned from all.
So that feels to me like, what a hell of a mature soul you are, to and I can't see it unless that, because it, but what you're saying reminds me of how mature that is. And I can't notice that in you unless there's a sliver of that in me. That's part of projection. What a beautiful story, Viviana, about how all of the above, the all that is, in the Lakota word about, in trying to describe what we limitedly call God, the all that is informs, holds, and is with us. And we are within all of that.
Very nice.
Billy, can I tease you for a bit?
Sure.
Because you've shared your own fundamental Christian fundamentalist backgrounds,
Yeah.
and how you have you have blasted into space, out of there into where you are now. And no one will know
Mhm.
consciously the gifts you have given to all of us by blasting away from that, and the wounds that you've been able to redeem
Yeah.
and make and invite wholeness for yourself as well as others. But what I remember out of my own fundamentalist culture, and I would guess that you would have this too, we would have Bible studies sometimes,
Yeah.
and part of the method was, let's just let the Bible open, and then we study those words right there. And that totally reminds me of when Billy does the
Yeah.
tarot and she's casting the cards or gently nudging them. It's like, well, that isn't any different.
Yeah.
My reactivity says that's not any different than letting this Bible fall open and I read the 23rd Psalm, or we read about some story that Jesus told or experienced. And it's like, okay, let's not judge either one.
Yeah.
Let's say, you know what? There may be an energy that looks accidental and
It's
also can be
yeah.
reflective of the collective unconscious, the intuition that yearns for us to gain insight and wisdom. Now, can we legalistically say, I have to do what that tarot says or what that scripture says? Well, that's going to, that's mistaken literalism.
Right.
How can it inspire us in that ancient Spanish Greek word to move more towards wholeness?
The actual term for that, opening the book, okay, and seeing where it lands and it's called bibliomancy. So
I
it's
don't know that term. Is that out
bibliomancy.
of your
No,
old
it's
religious?
no, bibliomancy is anybody can do it. I can take a book right now
Oh,
and pick it up and everybody say go to page
yeah,
35 or let it fall.
right.
So, but that's a way. It's somewhat a form of divination in some ways, but again, as you said, there's no reason that I have to take it literally. Maybe it's this just there to inspire.
It
Viviana.
reminds me of synchronicity.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
You just open it up and,
Yes.
okay, this is it.
This is it. Yeah. Look
Yeah.
at this insight, this droplet that we suddenly see. And in the world of synchronicity, there are billions of droplets all the time. Once in a while, we notice them and we think, golly, that's amazing.
So speaking of inspired, I feel very inspired since you brought up my religious upbringing, about taking things literally. Okay, so I was shipped off a couple weeks every summer to stay with my grandmother and go to vacation Bible school. Now I don't know why I was shipped off and my brothers weren't, but that's a whole nother story. But
Hmm.
I remember the whole thing was becoming born again,
Yeah.
and
I,
my grandmother always told me that I was going to go to hell because I had never been officially baptized.
hmm.
Wonderful thing to tell a little
And
child.
in your particular brand of religion, of Christianity, physical baptism underwater or
Yes, it was
ha-
full immersion. Okay, so
yeah,
here's
and
my story.
and you would go to hell if you didn't have that act.
Right, I was christened when I was a baby, the little sprinkling
Yes,
they do, but I didn't
yes,
accept Jesus Christ enough to where I would be fully immersed and go through the whole thing. So everybody was
yes,
born again, born again. So here I am, a 7 year old kid sitting in church, and I'm watching the preacher. He takes, it's a big deal. This woman's gonna be baptized. She's got her robe on. She comes up and does all the
mhm,
ritual, and then they take her into the pool. I mean, into the little bathtub, baptismal pool, I should say. And the preacher puts a rag over her face and then dunks her into the water, and then the curtains close. Okay, so all of that in a kid's brain. Oh my God, she has to die in order before she can be born again. And it's curtains for you. You remember that was an expression that people would say in like gangster films and stuff. Oh, it's curtains for you. So here I am, this little kid. Oh God, I still tingle when I think about this, because here I am, this little kid, and I think this woman actually died, because, and I'm thinking, oh, I just witnessed this. So I scream and kind of freak out, and my
Oh,
grandmother has to actually take me to the back of the church to see the woman dripping wet, that she was still alive, because I thought, as a little kid, I took it all literally. She's going to have to be born again. So I'm thinking,
mm,
Mm.
curtains. And
wow.
yeah, so I was completely traumatized by that. And my grandmother was somewhat wise enough to say, we have to show Bill Sherrill that this woman is still alive, So, but I was just like out of my sense. I was just out of myself. I was just jumping up and down and screaming because I couldn't believe that this was actually taking place, because I took it all literally.
Wow. What a powerful, scary story. But the literalistic interpretation, you had no choice as a little child. Children will do this.
Yeah,
But the way it was described, also, you have to literally be dunked in the water as a Christian, new Christian, or you will go to hell. That
right.
literalism permeated. So why wouldn't a little child, just decide, oh my God, that person, oh, be Jesus, this person has died.
So they can be
Wow.
born again. That was my
Yeah.
understanding.
So I have to go here in this. You have reminded me, and the other day when I was doing my run and I meditate and do whatever my version of praying is, the story of Nicodemus meeting Jesus in the middle of the night. Whether it's literally true, I don't know. It is an amazing story. So, this very probably wealthy, learned soul, maybe a part of a religious professional body, sneaks in to see Jesus and says, wow, everything you're doing is amazing. I want to be a part of this. What must I do? And Jesus says, well, you know, I have a more playfully profane way of describing this story. I won't get into that yet. But Jesus says, well, Nick, you need to be born again. And he did the same thing that Billy at 5 or 6 you did, which is, what? Do I have to crawl inside my mother's womb again? And Jesus, again, in my earthy way, is saying, you dumbass, no, don't take it so literally. And then Jesus said, look,
Mm,
how did Jesus say that? He said, you notice the wind.
mm,
You know, the wind is like the Spirit. You know not where it comes from,
mm.
but you feel it. That, Nicodemus, is what I'm talking about. To immerse yourself into the Spirit. And that is being renewed, to be born symbolically, to be a part of the wind that
Yeah.
renews and changes
Mm.
and fiercely covers and heals. So thank you for letting me share that piece out of your, Nicodemus, wealthy, aged soul, and little Billy at what, 3 years old, 5 years old, had the same reactivity.
Mm.
But that's what fundamentalists do.
Yeah.
And we're talking dreams and story and metaphor and liberation, which is not, it's scary to people
Mm.
sometimes.
Right. Right. Wow. Is that where the story about it's easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for him to enter the kingdom of heaven? Or how is that from the
So,
shame
so
part?
it may be, so I don't know exactly
Or a
the
camel?
location.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Jesus was telling these fun stories, and whoever was making them up or recorded them, because we don't
Mhm.
I don't know for sure what is historically a story that Jesus told versus what is a beautiful metaphor that emerged out of that. But yes, that is somewhere it's connected to
Easier
that.
for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich
Yeah.
man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So, in
Yes.
other words, we go back to the metaphor of what we started with the fall towards the glass blower's breath. It's not the material
Yes.
thing. It's not the
Yes.
material thing that the glass. I break the wine glass and fall towards the glass blower's breath. So
Mm.
that metaphor of the camel passing through the eye of the needle, I still remember that as a kid too. Again,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
take everything so literally when you're a child, because fantasy and reality are the same when you're between the ages of infancy into 7. So and
Mhm.
that's physiologically proven. So
Mhm.
there's some part of me that believed it all, and I'm imagining this camel, and I'm imagining, an eye of a needle. I
And
mean, so
it-
all of the stories, Noah's Ark was always a big one too. Me
a literal story. Yeah. Get
imagining
all
as
the
a little
animals.
story. And I was smart enough to go, I don't know how they fit them all in that.
Thank you.
I would go
Of
like,
course you were
wow.
smart enough.
And then I would also ask my grandmother, I'd say, but what about all the kids in Japan that don't know anything about Jesus? Or what about all the kids in Africa? They don't know anything. And I knew that they didn't know who Jesus was. So I'm thinking, are they all going to go to hell? And that was an unsolvable paradox for my grandparents to explain. So they just would gruff and walk off, and they didn't have any response. But I was,
They were they were called to be more mature by your question, and they couldn't do it.
yeah.
That it takes great maturity to hold paradox and to hold question. I saw Viviana's hand again. Okay.
No, I early on, I always
I
wondered.
see that hand.
I wondered what the Star of Bethlehem was, and the
Yeah,
three wise men, and
right.
how so many people think, well, they were the astrologers
Mhm,
bringing the
mhm.
incense and myrrh and going towards this alignment in the stars that was significating or bringing on the new king. They were astrologers, maybe?
Well, that is part of the legend. Part of the other piece is in my view, in my studies, we don't know that that actually physically took place. However, it is a legend that has beauty and truth, and there were these elements that you're pointing out of some version of astrology at that time that would point to major life and world events. So yes.
Yeah, right. That it was more of an alignment of stars rather than just one individual star, that they were seeing alignments of planets or whatever. Is that how you've heard the story, Viviana?
Well, who knows? I'm just posing
Yeah,
the the request to include astrology as symbols, metaphoric language that we
sure.
use.
Hmm.
And that is contained within what we sometimes have called the Holy Christian Scriptures. And oftentimes they're, demeaned by fundamentalists to say, oh, well, this was just one event and it was a God event, not an astrological event. So it's their way to uh, try to reconcile these scary possibilities.
Yeah. And you mentioned something before about being able to accept paradox, and I think Jung is quoted of saying that you can tell an immature religion that is not able to accept paradox, that there's no
Or an immature political position or
right,
an immature economic position. All
right,
of those things that you're pointing out, Jung is right on target.
yeah,
How can we tolerate opposites?
mm-hmm. Seemingly opposites, that want to,
Thank you.
that's the tension of the opposites, and that's one of the reasons I love dream work so much, is I think it helps us to embrace paradox. about ourselves, about the world, about our relationships, about my history, our history, whatever it might be. I'm going to be embracing those paradoxes all the time. I have to accept both, and I can't just always accept just one and say, oh, this is it, this is one I want to take. No, I have to take them both. And often people, speaking of metaphors, often when a dreamer reaches a point of embracing paradox, they'll dream about a bridge will show up in their dream.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
a bridge.
Wonderful.
So often, because I need both sides of the bridge. I can't get where I want to go just by staying on one side of the bridge. I have to get to the other side. So that's one of the metaphors that I've seen that shows up often for that reason.
Well, thank you for that. And also, well, in my dream that I worked on the other day, what we call the owl dream. So inside of this hole, there was this fat, plump rattlesnake that, may have eaten once in a while one of the baby owls. And you both pointed out, this is the paradox of life. And it's like the dreams are always, and maybe it's just uniquely for me, I always feel like I'm carrying paradox,
Yeah.
the yin and yang. And if I don't judge that, it's not right or wrong. It is the way we are. When I worked at the Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming, I was with people I truly love who could blow up the world at the order of the President of the United States. How can this be so full of love and passion and soul searching and painful and anguishing at the same time? This expanded me in ways that I've continued to change, holding opposites, thank you, Billy, seeming opposites.
Right.
How can we hold both, the yin and yang of life? And that's what dreams challenge us. That's what these symbols that we're talking about challenge us to look at, the paradox.
And it is the tension of the opposites where we get the power. I mean, it's like when you have a battery, you have one side's positive and one side's negative. That's how the energy is generated. So the more often I see those seeming opposites that really want to go together, that we end up with the tension of the opposites, and we realize that there's a lot of energy in there, rather than repressing one and just holding on to one and repressing the other. If we hold them both simultaneously, that generates a tremendous amount of positive psychic energy.
And that takes a lot of mature work to do this. And in our political climate and outward religious climate and militaristic climate, they don't like paradox. They want it either or. And that's part of what is happening, I think, is just wounding all of us in the outer world.
Yeah.
May I continue for a second or more? I don't want to over. Well, I'll stop. Let's go with other things.
No,
okay.
For a second. That was 1 second.
Okay. So it's okay to keep going?
Please.
Okay. So I've talked with some of my clients and some former clients. And yesterday I had this amazing visit with a person who used to be a client, who is a scientist and has worked in the U.S. National Park System for years and years and years. And she was reminding me how much she dreams, and she just loves dreams. And so I was encouraging her, listen to our podcasts, do this, do that. And then it just dawned on me. Oh, and by the way, when we explore dreams, we sometimes move into the symbolic language of astrology or tarot or some, and she goes, well, I think I think you would lose me there. And it's like, okay, that's fair, because that's not her language. And so we had this beautiful kind of wondering together, what does, how do we hold this and not let, somehow accidentally seal someone out from the deep spiritual yearning to explore ways to grow and heal that often come through dreams. Yes, ma'am, I see your hand.
You can't please everyone.
Yeah, that's one of the first things you had to learn about life. That's it. Yeah,
Uh, I get that.
yeah,
And I get the tension. And
right.
maybe it's neurotic on my part. However, I do get the tension of wanting to honor where people are at
Hmm.
and be a bridge of trust for people as they do their soul searching and what is their language. So, so both is true. You can't please everyone, and the yearning for wholeness is universal.
There we go with that paradox again.
Your story, Royce, reminds me a lot of my mother and
Mm.
her inability to accept anything but classical music, and rock music is not allowed, and I was not allowed to listen to. That's why I don't know anything about the music that you love, actually,
Oh, because when
Royce
we,
and
because
Billy.
and Dick
Yeah,
Clark.
because I don't know. I was listening to Bach and Beethoven when the world was listening to other things, and I don't
Mhm.
even know.
Yeah,
I don't recognize. Like somebody says, "Oh, that's the Beatles." I don't know. I don't know this stuff
yeah.
because my mother was so, as you maybe use one of your terms, fundamentalist classical,
Mm.
and that's the world that I grew up in. So even though I didn't have so much religion in my life because my parents were very scientifically minded, which is another language,
Uh-huh.
and religion was not allowed. I am deeply spiritual, but I've picked from all the languages, all the religions, and in my music too. I tend to, I tend to focus on classical, but I sprinkle in all sorts of things, and and within classical music also I'm a bit of an outcast because I'm genre fluid, as I like to call myself.
I love that.
I play world music, I play Irish music, Russian music. I mean, there's so many musics. There's so many flutes. Every part of the world has developed a special flute. The shakuhachi from Japan, and then the ney from the Middle East, and the Chinese diets, and the South American toyos and sampoña, and there's quena, and there's so many all over the world. And you can't just say, I play quena, period. I only listen to quena, period. I know.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm here to bring it all together
yeah.
again
It's
You
beautiful.
are the
with love.
bridge. Right. You are a mature bridge that has compassion. Wow. What a gift. What a painful gift, because you were raised in a rigid culture and you've blown the walls off of that.
I might, to this day, my mother does not accept my astrology. So,
Hmm.
oh well.
Wow. So rich we are.
And as we were talking before, I mean, my personal belief is that the dreams come in the language of metaphor, so we cannot understand them ourselves. We need to take them to someone else to help us understand. I can't see the deeper meanings of my dream because I'm uniquely blind to it. So everybody is. We're all uniquely blind to our own dreams. So if I'm someone who says, well, I believe in the language of dreams, but I reject the language of tarot or astrology or anything like this, I would ask myself why. Why do those other, is it because they're considered uh, forms of divination? Is that why I've learned, I think I have to reject them? I mean, it's all the same thing. It's all the same metaphor is runs throughout all of those languages. And as Viviana so brilliantly pointed out, am I only going to play one flute and one type of music the rest of my life,
Mm.
or am I going to listen to everything and get at least give it a chance? That's the other piece. So, anyway, that but it's always dreamer's choice, and dreamer can take it or leave it. And if it doesn't resonate for them, then that's okay. We move on to something else.
And that is not easily arrived at, and yet it's easily said. Your truth that you just said is powerful, and it sounds so easy, and this isn't easy.
Mm-hmm.
And but again, the paradox of the truth, not easy.
Right.
And yet the truth does set us free.
Well, and it all comes down to when we think about what is real. I mean, that's another thing that's a whole nother subject, which we can
Mhm.
talk about another day. But because when I'm in the dream and the bear is chasing me, I think it feels real. I mean, I'm running faster than I've ever run in my life, and I feel the bear breathing down my neck. Or the man pulls a gun out in the bank scene, and I'm like, oh no, this is it. My life's being threatened. It feels very real. But then if I come into this life and I go, oh, well, in real life, that's why we've gotten accustomed to saying in waking life, because it feels just as real in my dreams as it does in my waking world. So how can I see that they really are both one and the same? That the me that appears in the dream sometimes is different. Sometimes I'm younger, sometimes I'm a different gender, sometimes I look different or whatever, but that still feels like me in the dream. So what is real? That would be my question forever. It's like I'm not sure. I feel kind of like Robin Williams used to say that, like, reality, what a concept. There's a place in there where it's like, what do I decide is real? And why do I decide it's real? You know?
And to be able to even ask the question with a sense of peace, what is real, is a very mature place to be, so that we on purpose seek not to be rigid, and to hold with wonder, with true wonder, what is real, and to be at peace with that. And what does that look like as I live and move and have my being in the world? Wonder is for me a good beginning answer.
And love.
Love.
Yes.
Well, and curiosity and compassion. I think those are the big pieces. If I I'm very dedicated to dream work because I know that it tends to instill compassion. So frequently, especially when we do the work in the projective, because I truly am imagining myself in like when you were telling the dream, Royce, about the little baby owls and the snake, and I'm like imagining, I'm like there. I could just feel it. I could just see the little baby owls. I could see, this drama that was unfolding, in the world of the creatures that showed up in the dream. So, but it just seemed very vivid. So every time I enter a dream, it's as though I am the dreamer, and it helps me to see it from a compassionate layer. And so I think that that's a really big piece of it too. So curiosity and compassion, and to always be ready for something new. Maybe not make my mind up about everything and say, oh, this is real and that's not. This is good and that's not. Those like splitting aparts of things is where I get stuck in that inability to embrace paradox.
Yes, these are all well said statements and words. And again, this being able to be invited into the world of symbol and metaphor, for me, has changed me forever.
Yeah.
And when I'm out on my runs or my hikes, I have conversations with all that is around me.
Yeah.
The cliffs. I was standing next to part of one the other day, and it's like this is my friend. You've been here millions of years. This
Yeah.
morning when I was running, I turned a bend and there was a coyote in front of me. I
Mm.
mean, within 15 feet. And we startled each other. And he or she was like, oh, one of them, two legs, and hardly paid attention. We kind of noticed, I gave my blessing, be safe, do what you need to do. And so we were never far apart for 5 or 10 minutes. And it's like, oh, a cousin.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm considered a cousin, but I
Right.
consider that being a cousin of mine. And so yeah, the all that is, to be able to hold all.
Beautiful.
Well said, Royce, and thank you. I think maybe we could start wrapping it up.
Yeah. Yes.
And Royce, if somebody would like to meet with you, have a reading with you, share with you, how might one do that?
Thanks. Royce Fitts, FITTS.com. And on my website, there is a way to reach out to me easily, and we can have, without any obligation, at least a 30-minute consultation
Mm.
about what spiritual counseling and dream work looks like. And this will be, I think, a marvelous way to begin exploring the beautiful and awful paradoxes of life, because we are called into this. We are here and present. And how do we bring renewal to ourselves and to the world?
Mm. Wow. Beautiful.
Wonderful. That sounded beautiful. Sign me up.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, and Billy, your website, Wake Up to Your Dreams. Tell us a little bit about what you offer.
Yeah. So I offer throughout the month private sessions, and I also host a couple of dream groups, one that meets in the evening and one that meets in the afternoon. I also help people train to become dream workers through the Rocky Mountain Institute of Projective Dreamwork. So that's all on my website. And I also have speaking of retreats, Royce mentioned it early on, my first in-person retreat since the COVID era is going to be happening October 14th through the 16th at Peaceful Meadow Retreat Center in Boulder. So all of that information's up on the website.
wakeuptoyourdreams.com.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm Viviana. I'm a musician, a
A
flutist,
flutist
a flutist.
of world renowned, of all kinds of flutes.
All kinds of
However,
flutes,
yeah.
all inclusive.
Thank you for not being rigid and a fundamentalist with flutes. The world is gifted with your
Fluting.
expansiveness. No, with your expansiveness.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, and your fluting. Yes.
My website is viviana.org, viviana.org. And as I mentioned before, I love exploring all metaphors, stories, languages, symbols, archetypes.
Yeah.
And yes, since I discovered Billy online, I signed up for one of her dream circles, and I have an in-person meeting, but that wasn't enough. I wanted more, and my mind has just been so expanded by both of you, because I've this is where I met Royce, and I just can't get enough of dream work now. And
Mm.
anyway, and now we have a dreamer hotline. If you would like to share a dream with us,
Pay
please give us.
attention, listeners.
Yeah,
Pay
please
attention. You
grab a
do this.
pen.
Yeah.
The number is 720-573-9195. Again, 720-573-9195. We'd love to hear your dream. Call it in. We are also, all three of us have Instagram accounts. Royce, and TikTok accounts, I believe. Royce has an exploding TikTok account. And the podcast is available on Instagram, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, the Apple Podcasts. If you have enjoyed today's episode and others, please, we would love it if you gave us a rating and send us some stars and some love and some hearts and some shares. This keeps our podcast alive and thriving.
Thank you.
So, with that, we wish you all, dear listeners, happy dreaming until our next time.